Hello and welcome to the Canada's History Podcast. My name is Nelle Oosterom, and I'm the Senior Editor for Canada's History magazine. Today I'm speaking with author Ken McGoogan about his favorite person in Canadian history. Ken has picked Arctic explorer John Rae as his history idol. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Nelle.
So tell me about John Rae.
Well, John Rae was, in my opinion, probably the greatest Arctic explorer of them all. He was the guy who solved the two great mysteries of 19th century Arctic exploration. Number one, he solved the riddle of the Franklin expedition and the fate of that expedition. And number two, he found the final link in the Northwest Passage. Those were the two great questions that drove the great era of exploration that opened up the Canadian Arctic. So for that reason, I think he's a figure of incredible accomplishment. But quite apart from that, he was wronged by history. And I ended up writing a whole book about that called Fatal Passage, and it was made into a docudrama as well. Yeah, he was wronged by history because they did not want to hear what he discovered about the Franklin expedition, namely that the expedition degenerated into cannibalism towards the end. So when he returned to Victorian England with that news, the widow of Sir John Franklin, Jane Lady Franklin, basically orchestrated a campaign to discredit Rae and everything he had to say, had to report. And in the course of that campaign, she enlisted the most influential writer of the age, Charles Dickens. And together they did manage to defraud Rae of all the credit that should have accrued to him. So I felt that, and continue to feel, that he was wronged by history and he deserves an entirely new hearing.
So how did you personally get interested in the story of John Rae?
Well, it was interesting. I'd heard about him in the course of my general reading, and I thought he might serve as a minor character in an historical novel that I thought I might write. But then I won a fellowship to Cambridge University in England, and I got researching there in the library and at the Scott Polar Research Institute, and the more I learned, the more alarmed I became at the great mythology that Jane Franklin had managed to erect. And so eventually I felt such an injustice had been done that I had to set aside my projected novel and instead write a nonfiction book that would set the record straight.
So take us back to that time in Victorian history. Why was the possibility that Franklin's crew might have engaged in cannibalism such shocking news at the time?
Well, you're talking about Victorian England, and, they were on top of the world. There was that period, and, it peaked a little while later, but not much later. They were very, very high on themselves, and well, understandably so. They did rule the waves. The British Empire did extend right around the globe. They were definitely top dogs in the world, and the Franklin expedition had been sent off in 1845, virtually hand-picked, so that the notion that the flower of the British Navy could be reduced to cannibalism was totally foreign to their thinking. They didn't have any real experience of the Arctic, whereas someone like John Rae, who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, he'd lived in the North. He'd worked there for years at this point, and he understood the reality of the situation that virtually, most humans, if driven to extremes and facing a life or death situation, might indeed proceed to cannibalism if there was a body lying there. So it wasn't a shock to Rae; it was a shock to them when he brought it back. But the other thing was that was a racist time as well. not just in England, but throughout Europe. And Europeans in general saw themselves as the greatest people that had ever been created, and distinct from and superior to virtually anyone else. So Rae came back, with this news, what he'd learned from the Inuit, and he became the great champion of the Inuit, who came under attack by Dickens and others as savages who had probably committed some kind of an atrocity themselves. So it's because they did not understand, or the vast majority of people in Victorian society had never met any Aboriginal people at all, and certainly had no idea of the particular grace of the Inuit people. And Rae was left in the position of trying to explain this to people who had no idea what he was talking about. But he championed them. Not just with regard to this matter, but also with regard to everything he had learned from them. And this was another thing that I profoundly admire about John Rae. He came from Orkney in the northern reaches of Scotland, and he grew up very much a hunter and an outdoorsman in small boats and so forth. He was extremely competent outdoorsman when he arrived, as well as being a trained doctor. Well, the thing is, he didn't arrive and begin lording it around. He said to the Cree people when he arrived around Moose Factory, okay, I don't know how to cache meat. I don't know how to hunt caribou. Will you teach me? He learned from the Cree, first of all, and then he learned from the Inuit particular things like how to ice the runners on a sledge, how to travel extremely light, building snow huts as you go. So Rae arrived, and he was prepared to learn, anxious to learn from the peoples who had lived in these extreme environs for centuries. So that was another aspect of his character that I admire a great deal.
Well, it certainly sounds like John Rae should have his place in history restored. Do you think that your book has helped to change people's ideas about John Rae?
I have to say that I do, because of the feedback that I've received. I mean, there have been motions put forward in the House of Commons, which eventually got shot down, of course, but to have him recognized, have Rae recognized in Westminster Abbey, where Franklin is recognized, for example, that great cathedral of self-celebration in London. That has happened. There is a big push on, there has been for a while, to restore the childhood home of John Rae in Orkney, the Hall of Cleftron. Just the book continues to I mean, there was a docudrama that was made out of the book, in which I had a cameo role. I mean, too much great footage ended up on the floor, but I guess that's the way it always happens. It's a wonderful piece of work, an extension of the book, in effect. So my book did and has and continues to wreak change in terms of the way we view and interpret Arctic exploration history.
Well, thank you very much for this, Ken.
Well, thank you very much, Nelle.
I've been speaking with Ken McGoogan, author of 4 best-selling books on the search for the Northwest Passage, including Fatal Passage, The Untold Story of John Rae. My name is Nelle Oosterom, and I'm the senior editor for Canada's History magazine.